The year was 1976. Under the cloak of a moonless Tennessee night, the King's private jet, the Lisa Marie, roared to life on a Memphis runway. Its destination was not Las Vegas for a sold-out show, nor was it Los Angeles for a studio session. The plane, a Convair 880 customized with gold-plated seatbelts and a penthouse bedroom, was being dispatched on an emergency mission, a 1,600-kilometer round trip to Denver, Colorado. The cargo it was sent to retrieve was not a person, not a secret document. It was a sandwich. A specific sandwich, known as the Fool's Gold Loaf, a hollowed-out loaf of bread stuffed with an entire jar of peanut butter, an entire jar of grape jelly, and a full pound of crisp, fried bacon. An $80 monument to excess, flown across 2 states at the cost of thousands for one man. This is a fact. But what if this legendary binge wasn't an act of hunger at all? What if it was a desperate ritual to silence a ghost, the ghost of a starving boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who swore to God he would never, ever be hungry again? The world saw a king in his castle, but inside the walls of Graceland, a different story unfolded after midnight. The great house would fall silent. The Memphis Mafia retired to their own corners, the hum of fame fading into the cricket song of the southern night. But the kitchen never slept. It was a 24-hour stage for a one-man play, a brightly lit sanctuary in a darkening world. Here, Elvis was not a legend. He was a creature of compulsion, a phantom prowling the corridors of his own life, drawn to the glow of the refrigerator light. The meals he ordered were not feasts of celebration. They were acts of desperation. Gargantuan platters of meatloaf, mountains of mashed potatoes swimming in gravy, entire skillets of burnt bacon, and his infamous fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, grilled in so much butter the bread became a golden, greasy cage for the sweet, molten heart within. He consumed them not with joy, but with a grim, focused determination, often alone, sitting in the blue light of a television screen. The food wasn't nourishment. It was a sedative. Each bite was an attempt to fill a void so cavernous it threatened to swallow him whole, a void that had nothing to do with an empty stomach and everything to do with a hollowed-out soul. The men who worked in Graceland's kitchen understood their role. They were not just cooks. They were guardians of a fragile peace, the keepers of the king's most private ritual. They operated under a set of standing orders, a list of demands that was less a menu and more a psychological profile of a man haunted by the past. At any hour of the day or night, the pantry had to be stocked with specific items. A litany of Southern comfort: hot dogs, canned biscuits, Velveeta cheese, hamburgers, steak, ready to be fried hard, a minimum of 3 bottles of a specific brand of sauerkraut juice, and always, pounds of bacon and countless jars of peanut butter. This was not the diet of a millionaire who could command any delicacy from any corner of the globe. It was the food of the poor. This is the 3-minute mark, and the first secret is revealed. The key to understanding the king's tragic final act doesn't lie in the excess of his fame, but in the scarcity of his youth. Why would a man who had everything, a man who could dine on champagne and caviar for every meal, chain himself so devotedly to the diet of his own impoverished childhood? The answer wasn't on the plate. It was in a 2-room shotgun shack, miles and years away, on a dirt road in East Tupelo. There, in that house built by his father Vernon, hunger wasn't a concept. It was a constant, unwelcome guest. It was the chill in the air when there was no wood for the stove, the gnawing emptiness during the leanest days of the Great Depression. Elvis Aaron Presley was born into a world where the next meal was a prayer, not a promise. He watched his mother, Gladys, a woman he adored beyond measure, stretch every penny, every scrap of food, to keep her family from starving. He remembered the shame of government rations, of hand-me-down clothes, of a gnawing hunger that set him apart from the other kids. That thin, shy boy with the hungry eyes never left him. He was there, in the back of the limousine, in the wings of the stage in Vegas, in the presidential suite of the finest hotels. And every time Elvis sat down to a meal, he was not just feeding himself. He was feeding that boy. He was waging a one-man war against the memory of scarcity. Each 1,000-calorie sandwich was a brick in a fortress he was building around his heart, a wall of fat and sugar to protect him from the ghost of that hungry child. He wasn't just eating. He was exorcising a demon. He had made a promise to that boy, a silent vow, that he would become so rich, so powerful, that he would never, ever have to feel that gnawing emptiness again. But in his desperate attempt to conquer hunger, he had unleashed a far more dangerous appetite. The control, that was the other secret. As his life spiraled into a whirlwind he could no longer command, the dinner plate became his last kingdom. Colonel Tom Parker, the shadowy puppeteer of his career, dictated the tours, the movies, the merchandise. The studios dictated the scripts. The world dictated the image of the king. He was a prisoner of his own myth, a product to be managed. But his food was his own, and he was a tyrant in this kingdom of calories. He once sent a bowl of chili back to the kitchen repeatedly, not because of the taste, but because his cook had failed to crumble the precise number of saltine crackers into it before serving. Another time, he flew into a rage because the yogurt in the refrigerator wasn't his preferred brand. This wasn't the pickiness of a star. It was the pathology of a man desperate for control. He demanded his bacon be fried until it was black, until it shattered like glass at the touch of a fork. He insisted his burgers be cooked until they were burnt to a crisp. This wasn't about culinary preference. It was a demonstration of absolute power. In a world that constantly bent him to its will, this was the one corner of his life where he could bend the world to his. He could command a simple piece of meat to be destroyed for his pleasure, and it would be done without question. The members of the Memphis Mafia, his court of loyal friends and employees, were often present for these late-night rituals. But they were spectators, not participants. They watched as Elvis, their friend, their boss, the most famous man on earth, methodically worked his way through platters of food that could have fed a family. They saw the performance. They understood it was a private war, and the food was both the weapon and the enemy. He was consuming his own frustration, swallowing his rage, bite by greasy bite. But as the 1970s wore on, the war began to take its toll. And this leads to the next, more terrifying secret. While the world's tabloids focused on the king's expanding waistline, his private physicians were discovering a horrifying paradox. According to their reports, despite consuming what was estimated to be between 10 and 20,000 calories on some days, the king was, in a clinical sense, starving to death. His body was being ravaged by a secret famine. The endless parade of fried, fatty, and sugary foods was a deluge of empty calories, devoid of the essential vitamins and nutrients a human body needs to survive. He was suffering from ailments directly linked to malnutrition. His legendary energy was gone, replaced by a chronic fatigue he battled with a fistful of pills. He had severe bowel issues, high blood pressure, an enlarged heart, and painful gout. He was drowning in an ocean of food, yet his body was dying of thirst. The comfort had become the poison. The sanctuary of Graceland had slowly, insidiously, transformed into a velvet prison. The heavy curtains were drawn day and night, shutting out the sun, creating a timeless twilight where the only clock was the next meal or the next dose of medication. He was trapped by his fame, which made a normal life impossible, trapped by the colonel, who pushed him to perform even as his health collapsed, and now, trapped by his own body, a bloated, aching vessel that no longer obeyed him. The food was no longer a shield against the ghosts of the past. It was now the jailer of the present. Every bite was another bar on the cage. The sugar rush gave way to a crushing lethargy. The salty, fatty meals worsened his blood pressure and fluid retention, causing his iconic jumpsuits to be let out again and again. He was in a state of constant, low-grade pain, a pain he tried to soothe with more food, which in turn created more pain. It was a perfect, deadly spiral. But the spiral had a deeper, more tragic origin. It wasn't just the ghost of the hungry boy from Tupelo that haunted his table. There was another ghost, a more powerful one, whose memory was intertwined with every southern meal he craved. The ghost of his mother, Gladys. Her own complicated relationship with food, her own struggles with weight gain after Elvis became famous, and her sudden, tragic death in 1958 at the age of 46 had left a wound in Elvis's soul that never healed. In the final years of his life, his eating habits began to mirror hers in a disturbing, almost subconscious act of mourning. He was eating her favorite foods, the dishes she had made for him when he was a boy, when life was simple, when she was his entire world. Was he trying to keep her memory alive inside him, one plate of greasy comfort at a time? Or was he, in a final, tragic act of love and despair, following her down the very same path of self-destruction? The connection was undeniable. Gladys Presley's health had declined rapidly in the years leading up to her death. She had gained a significant amount of weight, and some reports suggest she, too, sought solace in food as her son's fame rocketed him into a world she couldn't understand. For Elvis, food was memory. Food was love. The taste of a perfectly fried pork chop or a piece of cornbread was the taste of his mother's kitchen, a portal back to a time before he was the king, when he was just her son. He was eating for two, consuming her grief, her favorites, her legacy. But this ritual of remembrance had a profoundly dark side. By emulating her diet, by allowing his own health to crumble in a chillingly similar fashion, was he subconsciously punishing himself? Punishing himself for leaving her behind, for his astronomical success, for not being there when she passed away while he was stationed in Germany with the army. The guilt was a constant companion, and perhaps the feast was a form of penance. This deep-seated psychological trauma manifested in another bizarre ritual: the hoarding. The Graceland staff was instructed not merely to have food ready, but to have it ready in truly absurd quantities. When the king wanted meatloaf, they were to prepare 3. When he asked for his favorite tiny smoked sausages, they had to be cooked by the 100. The kitchen refrigerators were not just full, they were monuments to abundance, packed so tightly the doors could barely close. Most of it would go uneaten. He would take a few bites from one meatloaf, a single sausage from a heaping platter, and then push it away, his appetite suddenly vanishing. This wasn't about consumption. It was about the spectacle. The sheer, overwhelming presence of food was the real drug. He needed to see it, to be surrounded by it, to know that the poverty of Tupelo could never, ever touch him again. It was a visual confirmation of his victory over starvation. Each overflowing pantry was a trophy room. Each fully stocked refrigerator was a monument to his power. He had not just beaten hunger, he had humiliated it. This need to display his conquest over scarcity also fueled his legendary generosity. He gave away Cadillacs, jewelry, and houses with the same impulsive energy that he ordered his meals. He would insist his friends eat, piling their plates high, almost force-feeding them his own obsessions. It was another way of proving he had so much surplus, so much wealth, so much food, that he could afford to simply give it all away. But by 1977, the victory was a hollow one. The fortress of food he had built had become his tomb. The cycle was now unbreakable, a perfect engine of self-destruction. The high-fat, high-sugar diet provided a fleeting moment of comfort, a chemical rush to the brain that numbed the deeper pain. But it led to more weight gain, which caused more inflammation and physical agony. The agony required more painkillers, sedatives, and sleep aids, and the pills, in turn, dulled his senses, clouded his judgment, and paradoxically, stripped his body of real nutrients, creating a phantom hunger that drove him right back to the kitchen. Comfort, pain, pills, hunger. The cycle repeated, night after lonely night. It is August, just before dawn, in the final hours of his life. The air in Graceland is thick and still. Elvis is awake. He sits alone in the jungle room, the strange, kitschy den that had become his inner sanctum, a testament to a taste that was uniquely his own, a place where no one could tell him no. An empty plate rests on the table beside him. The temporary solace of the last meal has already faded, replaced by a silence that rings in his ears, a silence more terrifying and more profound than any hunger he had ever known as a boy. The famine inside him is infinite. He reaches for the house phone, his fingers heavy. He isn't calling for a doctor. He isn't calling for a friend. He is calling the kitchen. The person who answers is his aunt, Delta Mallory Biggs, a permanent resident of Graceland and a constant presence in the final years. Her voice, thick with sleep, is a familiar sound in the dead of night. She knows the routine. There's no surprise, only a weary resignation. His request is simple, specific, and for anyone else, utterly bizarre. 4 scoops of vanilla ice cream, 6 chocolate chip cookies. It sounds like a child's late-night fantasy, but for Elvis, it was medicine. A final, desperate attempt to find a moment's peace. The kitchen staff, long accustomed to these nocturnal summons, prepares the snack. It is delivered to the king, who eats it alone, before heading upstairs with his girlfriend, Ginger Alden. He's trying to sleep. He can't. He complains of a toothache, one of many ailments plaguing him. His final known words are not a profound farewell. They are mundane, almost tragically normal. He tells Ginger, "I'm going to the bathroom to read." He takes a book with him, a book about finding God. He never comes out. This is the story we all know. The king, bloated and addicted, a victim of his own gargantuan appetites, died on his bathroom floor. A rock and roll cliché, a morality tale about the excesses of fame. But what if that story, the one we've been told for decades, is fundamentally wrong? What if the insatiable hunger, the bizarre cravings, the hoarding of food, weren't just a product of grief and psychological trauma? What if the real monster wasn't on his plate, but was already inside him? A medical time bomb, ticking away in the darkness that no one, not even his own team of doctors, fully understood. To understand this, we have to go beyond the kitchen and into the secret, fiercely guarded world of Elvis's medical records. After his death, the autopsy revealed something shocking. a condition so severe, his doctors were astounded he had lived with it for as long as he had. He was suffering from a debilitating, hereditary bowel condition, specifically, a megacolon. A normal colon is about 4 to 5 feet long. Elvis's was nearly 9. It was twisted, blocked, and had essentially lost its ability to function. For years, his body had been unable to properly process food or expel waste. He was, in a very real sense, being poisoned from the inside out. Suddenly, the bizarre eating habits take on a terrifying new context. This wasn't just a man eating for comfort. This was a man whose body was screaming for nutrients it couldn't absorb. Think about it. He could consume a 10,000-calorie meal, a feast fit for an army, yet on a cellular level, he was starving. The phantom hunger he felt wasn't a phantom at all. It was real. His brain, deprived of essential vitamins and minerals by a digestive system that had all but shut down, was sending frantic, desperate signals. Eat. Eat more. It was a primal, biological imperative that no amount of willpower could overcome. This hidden condition explains so many of the mysteries of his final years. The chronic constipation he suffered from since he was a young man. The constant pain and inflammation. The extreme weight gain that seemed to happen no matter what he did. And the lethargy. The deep, soul-crushing fatigue that was so often mistaken for laziness or the effects of drugs alone. He wasn't just tired. His body was in a constant state of toxic shock. The army of prescription drugs he was taking, painkillers for his various ailments, sleep aids for his chronic insomnia, uppers to get him on stage, were all being dumped into a system that was already broken. Their effects were magnified, their side effects were catastrophic, and they only masked the symptoms of the real disease festering inside him. His personal physician, Dr. Nick, later admitted the severity of the problem. He suggested that if the condition had been correctly diagnosed and treated in the mid-1970s with a surgical procedure known as a colostomy, Elvis might have been able to manage his health. But here we hit the tragic crux of the Elvis Presley myth. How do you tell the world's biggest sex symbol, the man whose gyrating hips changed the world, that he needs to wear a colostomy bag? The image was everything. The illusion of the immortal, powerful king had to be maintained at all costs. To admit to such a condition would have been a public humiliation beyond measure. It would have shattered the fantasy. And so, he suffered in silence. He chose the food, the drugs, the slow, agonizing public decline, over an alternative he saw as a complete surrender of his identity. This reframes his entire struggle. The man wasn't weak. He was at war with his own body. Every single night he walked on stage in those final years, in those heavy, jewel-encrusted jumpsuits, barely able to move, struggling to breathe, was not an act of self-indulgence. It was an act of almost superhuman defiance. He was a man in agony, fighting a battle no one in the audience could possibly comprehend, all to keep the dream alive for them, and for himself. The food was his self-medication for the pain. The drugs were his self-medication for the pain. But the performance? The show? That was his escape. For 2 hours on stage, he could forget the broken-down body and once again become the king. And there were other hereditary secrets lurking in his DNA. Post-mortem analysis of his genes has suggested he suffered from several other conditions, including a heart muscle disease and a deficiency of an enzyme that protects the body from toxins. He was, it seems, a genetic perfect storm of bad health. Born into poverty in Mississippi, where diet and prenatal care were poor, he was already at a disadvantage. Fame gave him access to the richest food and the best doctors money could buy, but it couldn't rewrite his genetic code. It's an almost Shakespearean tragedy. The boy who grew up with nothing, who conquered the world, was ultimately brought down by an inheritance far more powerful than Graceland. The silent, invisible flaws woven into his very being. The signs were there, even in his family history. His mother Gladys, as we know, died young, at only 46, officially from a heart attack. But her health had been ruined by what was reported as liver failure, likely exacerbated by diet pills and alcohol. But several of her siblings also died young, in their 40s, from heart or lung-related issues. The genetic deck was stacked against them. Elvis wasn't just mourning his mother with his diet. He was, unknowingly, succumbing to the same biological frailties that had likely claimed her too. The food wasn't the weapon that killed Elvis Presley. The food was just the ammunition. The weapon was his own DNA, a loaded gun he had been carrying since birth. So now, that final, lonely meal takes on an even deeper layer of pathos. The 4 scoops of ice cream, the 6 chocolate chip cookies. It wasn't just a comfort food binge. It was the last, futile act of a man trying to feed a body that was actively rejecting him, a body that was so ravaged by disease, both genetic and self-inflicted, that it could no longer tell the difference between nourishment and poison. He wasn't just eating his feelings. He was eating to quiet a biological scream so loud it had drowned out everything else in his life. In the silence of that Graceland bathroom, in the final moments of his life, his heart finally gave out. But the real failure, the true tragedy, had been happening incrementally for years, silently, secretly, in the deepest recesses of his body, far from the roar of the crowd and the flash of the cameras. A slow, internal collapse that no amount of food, fame, or adoration could ever hope to fix. And yet, the official cause of death listed on his certificate was cardiac arrest. A simple, clean explanation. But why this simplicity? What was so explosive about the truth that it had to be buried along with the king himself? The answer to that question is a single, terrifying word: polypharmacy. A blizzard of prescription drugs so vast, so potent, and so contradictory that to reveal the full extent of it would have done more than just tarnish the king's image. It would have vaporized it. The TULE, cardiac arrest, was the final, fatal symptom. But the disease, the one the world wasn't supposed to know about, was a ferocious, doctor-enabled addiction that had hijacked his body just as thoroughly as his failing colon. And the cover-up began within hours of his death. It was a frantic, desperate effort orchestrated by the two men with the most to lose: Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, and his personal physician, Dr. Nick. Vernon, the grieving father, became the iron-fisted guardian of the legacy. He understood that history is a story, and he was not about to let his son's story be drug overdose. The myth of Elvis the icon was now a multi-million-dollar estate, and that estate needed a tragic hero, not a cautionary tale. Dr. Nick, on the other hand, was fighting for his freedom. He was the man holding the prescription pad. If the world knew the sheer volume of narcotics he had pumped into the king's system, we're talking over 10,000 doses of various drugs in the last year of his life alone, he wouldn't just lose his license. He would be facing a prison sentence. So when the body of Elvis Presley arrived at the Baptist Memorial Hospital for autopsy, the narrative was already being written. The chief medical examiner, Jerry Francisco, assured the press it was a straightforward cardiac event. No signs of drug abuse, he said. But what was happening behind the closed doors of the morgue told a very different story. The pathologists performing the examination were stunned. His heart was indeed enlarged, almost double the normal size, a condition called cardiomyopathy. His arteries were clogged like a man twice his age. His colon was distended to a horrifying degree. But when the toxicology reports started coming back, the true picture emerged. It was a chemical firestorm. 14 different drugs were found in his system. 14. 10 of them in significant, potent quantities. There was codeine, at 10 times the therapeutic level. Ethinomate, a sedative. Quaaludes, a cocktail of barbiturates, or downers, that on their own could have been lethal. And yet, crucially, none of them were illegal street drugs. They were all prescribed. This gave the cover-up the loophole it needed. This wasn't the death of a junkie. It was the accidental result of a man seeking treatment for his many legitimate health problems. That was the story. A story so compelling, so protective of the myth, that Vernon Presley took an almost unprecedented step. He had the official autopsy report sealed from the public. Not for a year, not for a decade, but for 50 years. Why? What could possibly be in that report that was so damning it needed to be buried until the year 2027? Was it just the sheer number of drugs? Or was there something else? A finding so shocking it would rewrite everything we thought we knew? The sealing of that document is the single greatest mystery in the Elvis Presley saga. It transformed his death from a medical tragedy into a genuine conspiracy. The questions began to multiply. Did the medical examiner intentionally mislead the public? Was he pressured by the family, by the estate, to downplay the toxicology results? One of the pathologists present at the autopsy, Eric Muirhead, later broke his silence, stating he believed the primary cause of death was polypharmacy, and that the heart attack was the result of that drug combination, not the cause. He was adamant, but his voice was drowned out by the official narrative. This left Nick in an impossible position. He was both the key to the cover-up and its eventual scapegoat. To protect Elvis's image, the estate needed to blame someone. And who better than the doctor who gave a known addict anything he wanted? In 1981, he was put on trial for overprescribing not just to Elvis, but to other patients as well, including the singer Jerry Lee Lewis. The prosecution painted him as a reckless, feel-good, a starstruck physician who enabled his most famous patient's slow-motion suicide. They presented staggering evidence. In the first 8 months of 1977 alone, he had written 199 prescriptions for Elvis, totaling more than 10,000 individual pills. But Nick's defense was just as shocking. He argued that he wasn't the problem. He was the solution. He claimed Elvis was a master manipulator, a man surrounded by an entourage of yes-men who would get him drugs from anywhere. His strategy, he argued, was one of harm reduction. He was trying to control the uncontrollable, to replace dangerous street drugs with safer, prescribed alternatives. He claimed he even used placebo sugar pills to try and wean Elvis off the real medication. But the king could always tell the difference. Was he a villain? Or was he, in his own twisted way, a victim too? A man trapped in the orbit of a star so powerful it warped the judgment of everyone around him? The jury, made up of local Memphis residents, people who had grown up loving Elvis, ultimately acquitted him. They couldn't bring themselves to convict the man for trying to help their hero, even if his help was a daily dose of poison. The king, in their eyes, remained the victim. But while the legal system cleared Nick of criminal charges, the court of public opinion had already passed its sentence. He would forever be known as the man who killed Elvis Presley. The story seemed to be over. The villain was named, the hero was mourned, and the secrets were locked away in a vault. But the truth, like a river, always finds a way to the sea. Years later, another investigation, this one by the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners, would uncover something the criminal trial had missed. A piece of evidence so bizarre, so indicative of the madness inside Graceland's walls, that it casts the entire doctor-patient relationship in a new, horrifying light. It wasn't just about the number of pills. It was about how they were being delivered. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners discovered that Dr. Nick wasn't just writing prescriptions for Elvis. He was writing them for his entire inner circle. His father, his aunt, his stepbrother, his road manager. These weren't for their own ailments. They were proxies. A network of couriers dispatched to different pharmacies all over Memphis at all hours of the day and night. Their mission: to pick up thousands of pills and deliver them directly to the king's bedside, bypassing any single pharmacist who might raise an alarm. This was the madness. It was an organized, clandestine operation designed to feed a single, all-consuming addiction. The system wasn't just enabling Elvis. It was actively conspiring with him, an entire court of jesters and courtiers whose only job was to keep the king comfortable, even if comfort meant a slow, steady overdose. Dr. Nick wasn't the sole architect of this tragedy. He was merely the chief pharmacist in a kingdom of addiction. The real killer wasn't a person. It was the crushing, isolating weight of fame itself. The man who could have anything he wanted in the world couldn't get the one thing he truly needed: a single, honest no. He was trapped inside the gilded cage he had built, a prisoner of his own myth. He was the king, and the king's word was law, even when his words were a plea for self-destruction. In the end, his heart, that famously oversized heart that he gave so freely to his fans, simply couldn't take the strain anymore. It wasn't one thing that stopped it. It was everything. The final, official truth remains locked away, a ticking time bomb of a story set to explode in 2027. Will it confirm what we already suspect? Or will it reveal a final, shocking twist in the tale of the boy from Tupelo who became a king? Perhaps it doesn't matter, because the death of Elvis Presley is not a simple whodunit. It's a modern-day fable about fame, loneliness, and the price of being a god to millions, but a stranger to yourself. A story that continues to captivate us, haunt us, and break our hearts all over again. The music fades, the lights go down, but the story never ends. There are countless more tales of the man, the music, and the myth waiting to be told. To ensure the legend lives on and these incredible stories are never forgotten, subscribe to the channel and become part of Forever_Elvis_Stories.